I find that B2B marketers are often underinvested in content, and they think that content marketing really is, perhaps it isn't going to work for them, or sometimes they're worried that like, oh, our industry sector is way too boring. I have nothing to talk about, right? So in order to sort of break through that, content creation block, I guess you'd call it writer's block if it was just written, but content is obviously much more holistic than that. So when you need to sort of break that internal mindset, away from, and get them involved in content creation and understanding the value of are there any sort of tips or tricks that you find sort of break them loose from this idea like, oh, content marketing won't work for me, or I've got nothing to talk about?
I mean, you've plenty to talk about. And my like very tactical advice is record your sales calls, record your customer service calls, and answer the questions in writing that your customers are already asking on the phone. That's the first way to get started. So be the source of truth for the person who you want as your future customer, the person that you can really be helping. And if you start doing that, you will undoubtedly attract the people who are searching for that information. Because if one person is asking for it on a sales call or on a customer service call, I guarantee you there's somebody else that has that same question.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Today I'm joined by Jen Spencer, who's the CEO of SmartBug Media. But before we sort of delve into SmartBug, I wanted to get a little bit more information on your involvement in CEO Pavilion. So what's the elevator pitch for that?
Oh, sure. So Pavilion is an extraordinary community of different professionals, a lot in the revenue leadership professionals. I was a member of Pavilion when I was VP of Sales and Marketing here at SmartBug, and also as CRO. But now they also have a dedicated Pavilion for CEOs. So I'm part of that group. But Pavilion is a community of individuals who all work in very high growth organizations and are very much dedicated to continued professional growth. And so a lot of education, a lot of resources. For example, when I was VP of Sales and Marketing, I was in their Chief Revenue Officer school. So did that coursework, and that really helped prepare me for my role as a Chief Revenue Officer. So a lot of ways that I've been able to give through Pavilion, and then also get back and met some really extraordinary talent through that group as well.
Great. Well, that sounds like a great community. I wanted to hear more about it, and I'm sure that the listeners and viewers wanted to understand about that as well. So for SmartBug, it seems like your focus is inbound marketing, but you seem to have branched out as did, which we realized that when you're doing inbound marketing, that sometimes there are other friction points around the overall process of lead generation and lead nurturing that sort of need to be addressed. And so you seem to have, by necessity, perhaps branched into some tangential services. So I'd love to hear sort of what the catalyst was for that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, at SmartBug, we've always used, inbound is really the heartbeat of the way that we function. It's the methodology that we subscribe to, whether it's marketing, sales, customer success. There's an inbound way of doing things. And so we use that as that core methodology, but it doesn't mean that inbound is just doing these couple of tactics. And so if we kind of will go back in time, maybe even, 8 years or so, if you said, I'm an inbound marketer, people might say, well, you write some blogs and you publish ebooks and you try to get someone to convert and then you nurture them, right? And okay, great. Yes. And those things are true, but that's not it. That's not the end of what it means, what inbound really means to us. So that's why we had we refer to ourselves as an intelligent inbound marketing agency, because we're looking at what is the goal, right? What do we want to achieve? What is the client goal we have? And then let's reverse engineer what are the strategies and tactics that we feel we should employ in order to achieve that goal. And so that's going to be a mixture of everything from brand awareness. So think traditional, kind of like I say traditional, but digital search engine optimization, right? But also your brand perspective, brand amplification through public relations. So someone might not think, oh, PR for inbound marketing, but they are very much connected. Sales enablement, how that sales representative interacts with that prospective customer, depending on what stage of the buyer journey that customer is in and how they came to find you as an organization. You apply the inbound methodology to that, and then you can think about, well, what kinds of resources and tools does that sales team need in order to be effective in supporting that customer? So I think it's less about like, well, this is an inbound thing or this is not. And even for our clients who have an outbound motion to the way that they go to market, we still look at, well, what are some inbound tactics and how can we lean on the inbound methodology to better support those outbound activities? So it's just looking at every single tool that a marketer and a sales revenue leader can use to meet their end goal, which is typically in our world, it's around building sales pipeline, closing revenue, right? Adding revenue, adding monthly recurring revenue for those clients. So something to that effect, or it might be increasing wallet share, growing those customers, decreasing attrition, right? So yeah, it's all every tool. Like we'll look at what do we think we need most, and if it's digital, we do it.
Right. Well, that's great. I think many folks haven't taken as holistic a view of inbound marketing as you have, and I think that everything sort of does tie together. To your point about PR, is that an inbound marketing tactic, and should it be strategically integrated into the inbound marketing plan? And clearly it does, especially as we talk about the intersection between sort of digital PR, which includes blog mentions and social media to some extent, and then that overlaps into SEO because you get links and that helps SEO. So the things are much more interwoven than they used to be.
Yeah.
I'd love to though chat a little bit of one thing in inbound marketing, and particularly B2B inbound marketing. There's a huge difference in the value to an organization between an average lead and a great lead. And that average lead or great lead differs in a variety of ways. One is its likelihood to close, right? And the other thing, perhaps even more importantly, is the LTV of the lead if it does close, right? And immediate revenue and long-term revenue. And so, layering that into the overall marketing plan and the overall CRO revenue maximization plan becomes important. But I get a sense that some marketing teams, like they'll fixate on a KPI, like a cost per lead, and they won't get nuanced with it. They won't be like, oh yeah, but this lead is worth 10 times more than that lead. And when you're generating leads, the sales team really wants the Glengarry leads, right?
Yeah.
They want the average lead. They want to have the good leads. And depending on how they're compensated, they actually maybe even want the long LTV leads, right? Because they may be compensated based on the longevity of clients as well. So, how should marketing and inbound teams move from the sort of simplistic KPI way of thinking about it to a more nuanced, more holistic way of looking at leads, for example?
Yeah, I mean, well, I can tell you that the way we approach it for our clients is we have to understand how do they make money and how do they lose money. So we don't start with the marketing tactics and those KPIs. We're jumping right up to, well, how does this company build revenue for themselves? And where is it coming from now? Is it coming from direct channels? Is it coming from partner channels that are being kind of referred? Is it largely these very large enterprise accounts that contracts that have multiple year terms, or is it more of a product-led growth you're only as good as your last month kind of approach, right? So that's really important for us to understand. For most of our clients, the other thing is they have some dysfunction with what is considered qualified or quality, as you talked about. And so I think there's two different things we look at. So one is first separating lead qualification from lead scoring is really important. So almost everyone wants to jump right to lead scoring and they want scores for all their leads. Well, wait a minute. First, let's qualify them. What does actually marketing qualified mean? What does sales qualified mean? And so we want to make sure we get on the same page and then we know what those numbers sort of are. And then you can start looking at scoring. And so the way you score the leads is going to be customized for you, for your business. So if there's a kind of lead that's a higher value because maybe there's a vertical you're really wanting to break into and there's a lot of energy being focused there, then you can actually use external factors, right, that are not, intrinsic to the lead itself, and you can apply those. So but that's getting into a much more complex view of lead scoring, and that's assuming you've just got gobs and gobs and gobs of them, right? Now, as far as dollar value, looking at a cost per lead or something, we tend to think about that almost exclusively when it comes to paid media, because you're talking then about something that's very transactional, right? I put X number of dollars in and I'm getting X number of dollars out. And so really one of the only times we're really hyper-focused on a KPI like that is going to be when there's a paid media component that we're using as a layer to the organic strategy. The other thing, though, that our teams will do is they'll take a look at deal velocity when you're thinking about that overall lifetime value and you're thinking about the cost per lead. And for most of our clients, they don't just have these big whale kind of deals. They've got some of those whales, right? But then they've also got those smaller deals too. And so we like to have a nice balance in if possible, in how those big deals and those small deals, they work in parallel to help you have a more sustainable sales organization. So one of our directors of marketing strategy, Stephen Lackey, he always has these great analogies, and he says the small constant deals are what he tells his clients, these are putting food on your table every night, and the big whales are going out to eat money. So it's also getting them to think about the leads a little bit differently. And then you might go, well, we're going to spend more for these big whales because it's got this bigger return, right? But if you don't have that all organized inside your tech stack, if you don't have it really well documented, then it becomes really hard when you're looking at those sort of blended rates. It's easier if you can segment, and then you know where you should be spending more of your marketing and sales effort and energy.
Yeah, I like the concept of velocity, right? Because usually sales velocity tends to be highly correlated with deal size. Inversely, meaning the bigger the deal, the longer it takes, right? And so, whale hunting can take a long time. So if your family starves in the meantime, that's using that analogy, right? You can't exclusively hunt whales. You need to figure out how to get some tuna and maybe some sea bass in there.
Sure.
So, but given that, the other challenge, of course, from a feedback loop perspective, when you're looping in the marketing teams, is that you won't know if the whale closes for 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half, right? Because they tend to have that delayed close rate, the longer close rate. So are there some tips and tricks that you've got with regards to sort of layering the data that you're getting along the way back into understanding, this really worked well to deliver whales, but we're actually not sure if the whales are closed yet. So we still want to give it a likelihood to close, or use something to sort of give the thumbs up on that channel working, whether that channel was podcasts or blogs or whatever it was that you were doing. But, the jury's still out, but it's looking really good. So for the long sales cycle leads. So how are you layering that in to sort of decide how to allocate resources across the sort of minnows, tuna, whales?
Yeah. Well, I know what you mean. And So we'll look at macro data and then micro data.
Right.
So macro, right, will tell us kind of overall health, like overall these channels tend to be kind of working, right? We can like take a more of a wider like lens view kind of out. But then micro, if we see like here's an extraordinarily large deal that looks different, right, from what everything else looks like, and we go dial in and go, all right, let's completely track like the path, right? Like what's every step that was taken here, into getting very, very, very granular. And so we'll do that with a handful of potential customers to try to then see, well, if we look at this at a micro level, what can we potentially extrapolate from a macro? And how do we keep building on a hypothesis? So it'd be great to say like marketing with this science is literally just like, all right, you've got your, like, here's the hypothesis, and then we'll have this by this day, and then we'll have this by this day. But it's going to be a work in progress, right? And so it's about constantly refining that hypothesis. And it's also looking for like, looking for some of those results along the way. And so it's, I'm not going to lie, like it's tough, right? And we definitely will see clients who, they lose patience, and they give up on that too fast. So it's a problem, but they're making that the best business decision for them. But there's just been so many times where we look and we're like, okay, if we would have continued on this path, we can see what we believe would have happened, what the data is showing us would have happened.
Yeah, I think I love the point that you make, which I'd sort of re-describe as B2B marketing is a marathon, right?
Yeah.
So if you're making short-term decisions in B2B marketing, you'll probably make the wrong ones.
Yeah.
Because it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I love the fact that you've layered in the sort of long-term thinking, but yet you do sometimes get early data, right?
Yeah.
Which can guide you along the way. So it's this mix of sort of the long-term data points and the short-term data points that lets you really sort of adjust and tune the strategy as you go. My next question is really on the pundits every year talk about how email marketing is dead, right? And in B2B in particular, it just isn't, right? I mean, whether it's inbound marketing or then, drips and funnels and things like that, particularly for complex decisions where there's influencers and there's decision makers and, email, it remains foundational. But there's also some other forms of push marketing that have sort of in vogue as well. You've got obviously SMS marketing, you've got, browser push marketing. And so how are you thinking about sort of the choreography of touch points now that you've potentially got more than just email at your disposal?
Yeah. So I don't believe email marketing is dead. I actually don't believe that any channel is dead, but I believe that the way that a channel is used can become extinct. So because there was a point where it's like direct mail was dead, and then it sort of came back, right? So it's the way that you're actually employing it. So just, from like an email perspective, just to touch on that, it's not dead, but the purpose has definitely shifted, which is a good thing. So I think we're shifting to a world where the communication needs to be really educational. As human beings, like as consumers, as folks going about our day, we find our time to be extraordinarily valuable. We get really frustrated if our time is wasted, right? And even if it's, my best friend was recently, she was complaining about how much time it took her to like delete, archive, or unsubscribe from all of the emails that she got, just as a consumer, right? Not even in the business world. And she was complaining about it. I'm like, wow, it's weighing on you, right? It's like, okay, I don't think about it. It's all right, if I just delete it. But we have all of this noise, right? So we have to shift purpose to be really educational, really hyper targeted, very, very relevant to our customers. And is there a place for things like SMS? Sure, there might be, right? I can think about going back to the question of How do you make money? How do you lose money? Also, how are you measured, right? We had a client who was in the education space, and they were their marketing lead of they're responsible for generating like enrollment numbers. Their lead, they didn't get credit for it until that student attended, I think, 2 or 3 classes, right? Because the organization knew they had and I know this isn't B2B, but I think it's still relevant, right? Where they had the data that said that they have this drop off. If someone goes to like 3 classes, then they stay with the program. Right. If they don't make it through those 3, right? So then we looked at how do we solve the problem of getting that person to their 3rd class? So same thing with like, if you transfer that over to software and like software usage we have clients who say, well, we know our customers who use X% of our platform, they use these features, are more likely to stay, and they're more likely to refer others. And they're more like, great, okay, what are the things we can do? So going back to SMS, is there a motion where SMS can serve as a friendly reminder, as something helpful in that customer's experience? And the answer might be yes, it might be no. And so it's, instead of looking at it as like, this is a channel, other people are using it, I should use it too. It's like, well, is the channel relevant for like when you think about the problem that you're looking to solve? And when you look at the buyer personas, the customer personas as well, the people who are going to be receiving this, are they the right audience for it? Or are they going to, are they going to become disengaged with your brand because you're using this tactic? And so that's why it really just matters based on based off of the brand and that particular company. So.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you, because the relevance bar is higher,
right,
for SMS, right? So you can't use the same relevance KPIs or relevance score with email as you do with SMS. And browser push. Yeah, I don't find that in B2B people are quite as apt to subscribe to browser push notifications as they are with B2C. But it's fascinating to try to tune each of the channels to sort of try to delight that customer with the message, as opposed to just sort of cram it down their throat, even in B2B. And I think educational content is super powerful in the B2B area. So I like the fact that you wove that in a bunch of different times. In B2B marketing, I think sometimes recessions are extra scary, right? Because B2B marketing decisions tend to get kicked down the road. It lengthens the sales cycle. And what are you recommending to folks who are sort of worried that their pipelines are going to get drawn out as a result of sort of recessionary fears over the next few months? Well,
I'm right there with them. Right. So I don't have all the answers. I think you have to look at, it goes back to understanding like what does your business need? And so you have to make some business decisions about what you can sustain. So if okay, my sales cycle length is extending from 30 days to 45, what does that do to your cash flow? Right? What does it do to your health of your business? And you might say, you know what, it's fine, we can weather that storm, right? Or you might say, actually, that's concerning. We need to get revenue in faster. So that's where you might go, well, where are we having success closing things faster, things quicker? And do we want to spend more marketing and sales energy in that area and pull back from the ones that we know are going to be more elongated? So, I mean, that's just a business decision that companies have to make. And it's, it's tough. It's not an easy thing to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting you mentioned direct mail having gone out of vogue and then back in vogue again. Did it actually ends up, we have made a bunch of acquisitions in the direct mail category and have a robust practice there now. And one fascinating thing we noticed as a result of the pandemic was to really make B2B direct mail work, we now do our best to append home addresses to the executive files as well. and not just do direct mail into their business office because they may only get in there once a
Yeah.
week. It's much harder for the direct mail to break through the clutter when the pile is this high on their desk, right, of the mail that they missed over the last week. And so this sort of two-pronged approach into their home environment has been really useful. Similarly, we found that, Facebook is sort of counterintuitive as a B2B marketing channel, but with the right audience overlays, we found that that's also working surprisingly well. Is there anything interesting that you found that's sort of counterintuitive that's working for you?
Well, I think, it's interesting. Everything you're describing, it's just really just about remembering that you sell to a person buys, even though it's B2B, it's a person who makes that purchase. It's not a company. So for us, it's like we've always been remote. So we're almost 200 people fully remote. We've never had an office. We never will have an office. So we don't think about the world through that lens. We think about the world through our lens. So when the pandemic happened and everyone was dispersed and working out of their home, that to us was normal. But like going back to like whether it's Facebook or whatever it is, it's like that's where it's like, well, if you do your persona research really well and you understand what drives these people and who they are as whole beings, as whole humans, and not just their job title, it's amazing what kinds of channels you would have typically thought, well, that's for B2C, or, that's an inappropriate channel for B2B, that you might go, well, actually, no, like this is a way to meet that human being where they are. Right. And so it changes the way you think, I think, about advertising. And it changes the way you think about, about a number of different kind of forms of digital media and things that are in home as well. So I just think I encourage people, please keep thinking about your buyer as a person and not as a company.
Yeah, that's absolutely great advice. It's people buy, companies, the check may have the company at the top, but it's the person who buys.
Yeah.
I find that B2B marketers are often underinvested in content, and they think that content marketing really is, perhaps it isn't going to work for them, or sometimes they're worried that like, oh, our industry sector is way too boring. I have nothing to talk about, right? So in order to sort of break through that, content creation block, I guess you'd call it writer's block if it was just written, but content is obviously much more holistic than that. So when you need to sort of break that internal mindset, away from, and get them involved in content creation and understanding the value of are there any sort of tips or tricks that you find sort of break them loose from this idea like, oh, content marketing won't work for me, or I've got nothing to talk about?
I mean, you've plenty to talk about. And my like very tactical advice is record your sales calls, record your customer service calls, and answer the questions in writing that your customers are already asking on the phone. That's the first way to get started. So be the source of truth for the person who you want as your future customer, the person that you can really be helping. And if you start doing that, you will undoubtedly attract the people who are searching for that information. Because if one person is asking for it on a sales call or on a customer service call, I guarantee you there's somebody else that has that same question. And then you can get fancy and you could go look at Google and you can look at some search and look at some of the trends, and you can see the exact volume of searches that happen for those keywords on a monthly basis. And then from there, you can, maybe start refining, right? Like the content that you create. But if you're like, I don't even know where to get started, I would start with the questions that your sales team and your customer service team are answering on a daily basis.
Absolutely. I agree on that one 100%. Because it's almost an endless stream of unanswered questions that you can then put into a spreadsheet and use for an editorial calendar. Mm-hmm. And then deciding whether you do purely text or podcasts or whatever the case may be, that's obviously depends on, your individual teams and preferences and where your customers hang out and the way they consume content. Next question is really about testimonials, right? Obviously, there's another content source. And some organizations are a little bit tentative with regards to asking for testimonials, and other organizations are very comfortable with it. So for those that are sort of maybe underutilizing testimonials, any any advice as far as when do you ask? Do you wait until they've been a customer a long time? Do you ask the day that you close the customer? Or do you wait until there are numbers that you can use in the testimonial, or is it basically anytime you can get one, get one?
Yeah, I think we wait too long to ask. So I think that's just a problem that plagues most. So I think I think every company, you should think about like, what are the milestones where you can be making those requests and asking. I don't necessarily think it makes sense right when someone closes, because I think the testimonial becomes more powerful if someone can speak to the value that your product or service has been able to provide them. Because the end of the day, the reason why you want a testimonial is that your future customers are looking for social proof that you're going to do what you said you were going to do, because there's so much out there that's not what it seems to be, unfortunately, right? So no one wants to get burned. So they want that, right? And you also want to be able to leverage those testimonials to fuel your flywheel to then use it in your marketing efforts to then attract more people. So if we think about the value that piece of content provides, if you get an email with a testimonial, do you want it to say, like, what kind of weight should it be carrying? So it should be solving a problem, alleviating a pain point for that person who's receiving that communication. So you probably don't have that until you've had a little bit of time to spend with that customer. But I would say don't wait too long. I would look for, in your business, what is the first part, like the first moment that happens in your relationship where people tend to have this like aha moment where they're like, wow, like this is great. And they're like, get even more excited about their relationship with you. That point, again, I know exactly what point that is in our business, which is going to be different from anybody else's. But if you can identify what that point is, that's the time to be asking. And then there's so many cool ways you can use testimonials, but it starts with, you don't want to wait too long. It's just, you got to get the timing just right.
That's a great point of view on sort of looking for that catalyst internally as the relationship evolves. Mm-hmm. Another thing I'd love to get your point of view on is often in B2B, not only are there different personas of the decision maker sometimes, but mm-hmm. sometimes there's entirely different personas around all the influencers who surround that decision maker, and sometimes have veto power, right? Just because of the way the organization is making its decisions. So as marketers, we're trying to build our own choreography, right? Of how to message to the decision maker, but also potentially how to support messaging into the influencers around that, internal influencers around that decision maker. And as you sort of plot that out, whether you're doing it on whiteboards or using tools or whatever, are there any best practices you would recommend as people think about the messaging choreography?
Yeah. So I think it's important to note that buying committees are growing. So there are more buying committees now than there were even a few months ago. So what we're seeing is people who used to have decision-making authority in their business, they don't have that same authority anymore. So just something everyone needs to be aware of. When you're building out your personas, you have to take into account those buying committee personas too. So it means you've got a persona that you're using to thinking about the inbound methodology to attract a buyer. And then usually it's the individual that has some authority, some decision-making power, and also it's experiencing the pain. And then there's other people who are peripheral, right? And those people, like if you're in technology, those people might be in IT, might be in security, might be in finance. So what I've found in my past experience running marketing and sales inside of software companies is that I learned that I needed to have these separate educational brand campaigns that were running, that were targeting in this one particular company, the office of the CFO, because we noticed that we would move all along throughout that sales cycle. And then we hit a point where the deal would stall because we were a young company, not a a name brand, right? And the contract would get to that CFO's desk and they would be like, whoa, hold on. Like, who is this? What is this for? Right? They weren't looped in. So you can't change the way that you can't really alter the behaviors that exist in your prospective customer's company. Like that's, you only can do so much. So, but there's some extraordinary tools and technology out there that can enable you to get in front of those people earlier in the process. So simply, we were using an account-based marketing ad platform. So once a deal made it to a certain stage in our CRM, that would add that company to a list. And then we would show very finance-focused ad campaigns to build awareness for our brand to that people who held VP or C-level finance roles at those companies. So there's technology, account-based marketing technology like Rollworks or like Terminus or 6sense that allow you to do this.
Yeah.
And integrated with your CRM. So in our case, for our customers, integrated with HubSpot or integrated with Salesforce. And you're able to kind of keep your sales motion moving along while continuing to nurture. Like the marketing doesn't stop. You want to continue to nurture that entire other stakeholders in that company. So nothing actually makes my heart sink more than when I hear in a company, well, once the lead moves over into sales, then marketing doesn't touch it anymore. I'm like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Now the message needs to change, but marketing's job isn't done.
Right. That's an excellent point. And for those companies where they're still on premises, one of the other tactics we like to use is serve ads into the IP addresses that for those corporate locations. And some of those, in addition to the vendors you mentioned, there are some other ways of doing that. And of course, the janitor sees the ad too, but it's a little bit of waste, but it still reaches the CFO, CEO, and potentially every other influencer that way. So, and it's labor intensive, but it's not particularly expensive. So it's very useful from that perspective. Yeah. One other thing I noticed with our clients, and I'd love to get your perspective on it, is that within B2B marketers, the breakdown of roles and responsibilities, both operationally and strategically, between the CMO and the CRO tend to not always be the same, right? In some cases, the Venn diagrams overlap a lot, and there's a lot of collaboration. And in other cases, the Venn diagrams don't touch as much. And to your earlier point about, some people think like, oh, once sales has it, marketing's done with it. But the more integrated teams tend to realize, okay, no, marketing's never done with it, because you also want to market for retention purposes. So when there's more of a disconnect between the two groups, right? Is there ways that we as external providers, yourselves and ourselves, can sort of help bridge those internal communication gaps and have them work in a more unified way?
Yeah, for sure. I think first, one of the trends we're seeing, especially in the mid-market, is just more and more chief revenue officers owning marketing, right? So owning marketing, sales, and potentially, customer success too. And in those cases, it's actually really, really effective because it's those teams are truly collaborating really well. There's one leader who can really has control, can pull the levers. It's how we're set up as an organization as well. So the more we see that, the better overall engagement that we're observing between the two teams of marketing and sales. So I think that's still that whole philosophy, that whole organizational structure is still in its infancy, and but I think it's a good thing. But sometimes it's not the case, right? So when we're first working with, and we're typically working with the marketing leader, right? If it's not like that revenue leader, that CRO. So we have to bring sales into that conversation. So sometimes we are sort of forcing it to say, like, this is really important for us to understand the way that you make money as a business. So we need to pull these people in. So sometimes sometimes with some of our clients, we are literally crafting the initial like SLAs between marketing and sales, and we are getting them to adopt a common language and serving as a bridge or like as a mediator. Sometimes we're helping with more cross-departmental transparency, and it's just we're unlocking certain reports, and there's analysis that the team hasn't been able to get to on their own that we're able to share, and just being able to bubble up that data is really helpful for aligning those teams. And sometimes what we'll encounter are repetitive processes where we see marketing is gathering all this, most commonly, marketing is gathering all this information about a potential customer. And then it goes over to sales, and sales goes through the laborious process of collecting the same kind of information from that customer, wasting the customer's time and wasting their time too. And so that's where we love to implement technology and processes to help streamline that process. And once you do that, it alleviates this pressure that both teams feel, and it gets them working more effectively together.
Yeah, I would agree. I found that to be the case as well. And sometimes I've also found that, as an external entity, when we can be that catalyst to getting the two teams more aligned on KPIs, that also tends to sometimes free up budget.
Yeah.
Because the budget was also sort of doing things twice, or there was overlap in areas, because they thought that they didn't realize that the budget would be more efficient if it was managed holistically.
Yeah.
So I think it ends up becoming a win-win for everybody. So final question, Jen, is sort of what has you excited about next year? It's going to be an interesting year one way or the other. Lots of things moving around in the ecosystem.
Yeah, it is going to be an interesting year. I think I'm excited about it will be forced, like this forced focus, but I'm excited about it, the forced focus that I'm expecting to see on customer retention. So I think for far too long, companies have been focused just on adding net new customers, and less energy focus on retaining the customers you have. We've seen the math. Like, we know that it costs us way more as businesses to bring new customers in than it does to retain and potentially even grow the ones we have today. So those who understand the economics will hopefully put their money where their mouth is and focus on the customer retention and get better at delivering a really superior customer experience and ensuring that there's a lot of value in every interaction you have with a potential future customer or existing. And even thinking about the way that when you stop doing business with someone, what that experience is like. Because when I look at the market, the hiring market, the job market, when I look at roles people have, there was a time where if someone was in a role for less than 5 years, you would kind of poo-poo that, right? Like, oh my gosh, why were they there such a short period of time? Whereas today it's constantly in flux, and there's less of a stigma, and people do jump from one company to another. We have a client who in 2.5 years, this is the third company that she's been at, and we're going to work with her again. And so it's thinking about that overall relationship, no different than the way you would treat personal relationships that you have, and thinking about how you treat somebody and how they remember you. So I think, it's some of that's going to be good for us. As revenue leaders, as marketers, to really be focused on how we're delivering value, how we're communicating, how we're supporting people. And I think those who can really wrap their arms around it and do it well, I think it's going to pay off for them in the year.
I would agree. Thanks so much for joining me, Jen. It's been a pleasure chatting about the wonderful world of marketing, inbound and otherwise.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street. If Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.